Most people never stop to wonder how a symbol so deeply tied to American railroading could fade away so fast. At one point, more than 34,000 bright red cabooses rolled across the country, serving as the eyes and shelter of every freight crew, while small towns learned to spot the conductor's silhouette in the cupola. Then almost overnight, they were gone, replaced by a plain metal box and a very different way of running trains. Behind that quiet disappearance sits a mix of hidden danger, rapid innovation, and a $381 million choice that changed rail history. So what really forced the caboose off the rails, and who decided its fate? Let's dig in. On the soggy rail lines of upstate New York in the 1840s, freight trains were already stretching farther than anyone had planned for. Yet the people responsible for keeping them moving had nowhere to work. A conductor named Nat Williams found himself juggling paperwork, lanterns, flags, and orders while standing in the open air as the train lurched forward. Instead of waiting for permission or a solution, he pulled an unused boxcar into service, nailed together a crude wooden bench, flipped a barrel on its side, and turned it into a mobile workspace. He called it a rolling office, but without realizing it, Williams had set the template for what would become one of the most recognizable cars in American railroading. Those early setups were barely more than shelters with wheels, offering limited protection from wind, rain, and snow as crews bounced between towns. Still, they solved a real problem, and railroads were quick to notice. As rail traffic expanded and routes pushed deeper into isolated territory, crews needed a dedicated place to work, rest, and stay dry. By the 1850s, major lines, including Union Pacific, began assigning specific cars to the end of freight trains, so conductors and brakemen could manage operations without fighting the elements every mile. These early cabooses were rough and often rode on just 4 wheels, a design that earned them the nickname bobbers because of their bone-rattling motion. Injuries mounted as trains grew heavier, and by 1913, Ohio had seen enough. The state banned 4-wheel cabooses outright after too many workers were hurt, forcing railroads to adopt safer designs. 8-wheel cabooses soon became the standard, delivering a smoother ride and opening the door to real improvements inside. Space appeared for bunks, a stove, storage for tools, and room to move without bracing against every jolt. Even with these changes, one problem refused to go away. Conductors still struggled to see what was happening along the length of the train. Boxcars had no rear windows, and watching dozens of cars snake through curves was nearly impossible. In 1863, a conductor named T.B. Watson, working for the Chicago and Northwestern, came up with an idea that changed everything. He cut an opening in the roof of his caboose and built a raised platform above it. From that elevated perch, he could finally see his entire train, scanning for shifted loads, broken couplers, dragging equipment, or the faint smoke that signaled an overheating bearing. That raised lookout, soon known as the cupola, transformed the caboose into a rolling observation tower. Railroads quickly recognized its value, and by the 1870s, cabooses with built-in cupolas were rolling out of shops across the country. Their silhouettes became instantly familiar, a small structure rising above the roofline at the very end of a long freight. Inside, the caboose continued to evolve alongside the work itself. Conductors packed the interior with ledgers, timetables, flags, and lanterns, while brakemen grabbed rest on narrow bunks between stops. A cast-iron stove warmed cold nights, coffee simmered during long waits, and over time, some cabooses even gained basic kitchens and toilets. For crews who spent more nights on the rails than at home, the caboose became a second living space rather than a simple work car. Paint schemes added another layer of identity. Many railroads chose bright red, but greens, blues, and other bold colors appeared as well. Company names and reporting marks were painted large and clear, turning the last car into a moving signature. Anyone standing trackside could tell which railroad owned the train long before the locomotives came into view. Every design tweak served the same core purpose: keep crews safe, keep trains running, and spot danger before it turned into disaster. As freight trains grew longer and heavier, though, the risks grew with them, and the solutions had to keep pace. Life on the rails carried constant danger. Before the widespread adoption of automatic air brakes, stopping a train meant sending brakemen climbing onto moving cars to manually turn brake wheels. They did it in daylight and darkness through rain, snow, sleet, and ice. One missed step on a ladder or one unexpected jolt could send a man tumbling onto the tracks. Broken bones, crushed hands, and fatal falls were part of the job. In that environment, the caboose served as more than shelter. It was a place to recover, to regroup, and to prepare for the next risk waiting a few miles ahead. By the 1880s, workers began organizing around the shared dangers of rail life. The Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen was founded inside a Delaware and Hudson caboose, a fitting birthplace for a union built by crews who lived and worked at the back of the train. Over time, the organization pushed for safer conditions, better equipment, and fairer schedules, slowly reshaping the industry from within. Even with those efforts, risk never vanished from the rails, and the caboose remained a visible symbol of the people facing it. That symbolism extended beyond the crew. Cabooses were painted in vivid colors that stood out against steel rails and gravel beds. Fire engine red, deep green, and bright blue cars rolled through towns across the country, catching the eyes of kids who waved from backyards and crossings. Photographers waited for them, knowing the splash of color made the perfect final frame. Logos and lettering were bold and proud, turning the caboose into a moving emblem, recognized from New England to the Pacific Coast. By the 1920s, nearly 34,000 cabooses traveled American rails, each one carrying the marks of the people inside. A dented stove, a patched bunk, a favorite lantern hanging near a window, all signs of long hours and shared responsibility. At its core, the caboose was an office, a home, and a safeguard rolled into one. Conductors and brakemen watched over their train from the cupola or bay window, knowing that every mile tied their safety to the steel stretching ahead. For decades, the caboose proved that railroads valued not only efficiency, but also the people who made it possible. Any replacement would have to meet that same standard of trust, because mistakes on the rails were measured in lives. Technology, however, kept advancing. By the mid-20th century, new tools began taking on jobs once handled by human eyes and instincts. Trackside hotbox detectors appeared in the 1950s, quietly scanning freight trains as they thundered past. Infrared beams measured the temperature of every axle bearing, comparing each reading to surrounding axles and ambient conditions. If one ran hotter than the rest, signaling a failing bearing or dragging brake, the system flagged the exact car and axle. Alerts were sent by radio, giving crews time to stop before smoke turned into fire, or fire turned into a derailment. By the 1980s, these detectors formed a constant, weatherproof line of defense that never blinked, no matter the fog, snow, or darkness. Still, another challenge remained. Railroads needed a way to confirm that the train was intact and that air pressure reached the rear. In 1969, the Florida East Coast Railway tested a radical idea by removing cabooses altogether and attaching a small metal box to the last coupler. This device, soon nicknamed Fred by crews, connected directly to the brake pipe. Inside, sensors measured air pressure while motion detectors tracked movement. Data traveled by radio to a display in the locomotive cab, allowing engineers to see brake conditions at the rear in real time. If the train separated or an emergency struck, the device could dump air and apply brakes from the back, something no human crew could do as quickly. Over time, these end-of-train devices grew lighter and smarter. Modern units weigh under 30 pounds and can run for days on a single charge. They transmit a steady stream of information, including brake pressure, motion status, battery life, and GPS location. Standardization across North America meant any locomotive could communicate with any device, regardless of railroad. With each mile, silicon and radio waves took over the safety functions once handled from the cupola, matching and in some cases surpassing what the caboose had provided. As the technology proved itself, accountants took notice. By 1980, every mile a caboose rolled cost railroads about 92 cents. Multiply that by millions of miles each year, and the expense climbed fast. Cabooses did not carry freight or generate revenue, yet they required fuel, maintenance, and an additional crew member. One terminal superintendent in Texas calculated that skipping caboose switching alone saved $300 per day at a single terminal. Scale that nationwide, and the savings reached staggering levels. When reports estimated that retiring cabooses could save the industry roughly $381 million each year, the debate shifted decisively. Labor agreements in the 1980s reduced crew sizes from 5 to 2, and hotel rooms replaced bunks on rolling offices. With sensors watching bearings and electronic boxes monitoring brakes, the caboose began to look less like a safeguard and more like a costly tradition. One obstacle still remained: state laws. For more than a century, states such as Virginia required a caboose on every freight train. That final barrier fell on July 1st, 1988, when Virginia repealed its last mandatory caboose statute. The change took effect immediately, and railroads moved fast. Cabooses slipped off mainline freight trains with surprising speed, replaced by small electronic units locked onto the last coupler. There was no farewell and no sense of nostalgia in the decision, only numbers, performance, and consistency driving it forward. Technology stepped into a role that tradition had held for generations, changing how trains were watched and protected. Today, quiet sensors and blinking indicators monitor every mile from the rear, cutting risks while saving railroads hundreds of millions of dollars each year. As efficiency continues to rewrite the rules of the rails, what parts of the past disappear without anyone noticing? And what does progress quietly ask us to give up next? If this story made you think, drop a comment below and subscribe to the channel for more such videos. Thanks for tuning in.